everybody. Thanks again for joining me as we look at the book of Esther. This is the last of the historical books in the Old Testament, and it is a beautiful and inspiring story of how God can work in us and through us to get his plan done. This is a story about a hero named Mordecai and a heroine named Esther, and how God uses them to deliver the people of Israel from genocide at the hands of a man named Haman. And the theme of this book is God's sovereign providence. It shows that God, in the midst of a broken and wicked world, is committed to protect and to provide for his people. And this can encourage you that God is working good in you and through you for other people, just like Romans chapter 8 says. See, in this book, we see the hand of God sovereignly protecting and delivering the people of Israel. And in the same way, God is working good redemptively in your life. He's doing something good in you, but also he's doing something through you. And I want to encourage you to read this book because you'll see how God is working in your life, and you'll see how God can use you in a mighty way. I love the way Mordecai says to Esther, "How do you not know that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" See, we often quote this, "for such a time as this," but it's a statement of God's purpose in our lives, but also purpose upon our lives. That God will position us even in situations that are not good, not necessarily that God caused the situation, but he'll use us like he did with Esther or other people in the Bible like Joseph, and he'll cause good to come out of bad. He'll use us to reach other people and to help other people. And this is what we see in the book of Esther. Now, the book of Esther takes place while the people of Israel are still in exile in Babylon. They're under the reign of the Persian Empire. It's been over 70 years since they went into exile. Daniel's probably old or he's passed away. This book is written or takes place at the same time as Ezra and Nehemiah, because there's been a number of people under Zerubbabel and such that have gone back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and the walls. But most of the Jewish people, like Mordecai and Esther, they stayed in Babylon. And this is under the reign of Xerxes I. And the book basically is explaining this story, this beautiful and inspiring story of God delivering the people of Israel from this potential genocide. And it opens up chapter 1 through 3 is really the setup of the story. And you see basically Xerxes I is this honestly selfish, narcissistic king. His queen Vashti doesn't do what he says, and so he basically fires her as queen. And they put on a beauty pageant, super weird and disgusting, to find a new queen. And Esther is the winner, and she becomes the queen. And in the midst of that, the story also sets up this man named Haman, who also is just like the greatest picture of a narcissist. He's absolutely self-centered. He has everything he needs. And yet he's not happy because this one man, Mordecai, won't bow down to him. And he finds out Mordecai is Jewish, so he decides to annihilate all the Jewish people. It's just absolutely crazy. And of course, this is a picture of anti-Semitism and shows that it's not just a person. It is a spirit. It's an antichrist spirit. And so in these first 3 chapters, we have this setup. Mordecai is seen as a hero. He does some things that actually save the king, but he's never rewarded. And you see Esther, that despite all this disgusting chauvinism, she and Mordecai are this beautiful picture of a father and a daughter, an adopted daughter, and they really support one another. Mordecai is really there to support Esther, and she really cares about him and follows his lead. And then you see this picture, of course, of the king and Haman. And this is the setup of the story. And then the plot thickens in chapters 3 through 6 is where Haman develops this plot against the Jewish people. And the word lot is the Hebrew word Purim. And this story is actually leading to and setting up an explanation of why the Jewish people celebrate Purim. And it comes from the fact that Haman kind of rolled the dice, so to speak, cast the lot to decide on which day they would annihilate the people of Israel. And yet God's people are delivered. And so the word Purim or lot is that Haman was casting lots to destroy them, but God's lot, so to speak, was what delivered them. And again, this is a picture of providence. The word providence really comes from the word provide, and it's God's supernatural provision or protection. And that's what it means when we say God's providence. And this is, of course, in contrast to coincidence. Coincidence means where two events coincide. And it's just that by chance, two events lined up, coincide or coincidence. But this is, of course, we know as God works redemptively good for our lives in us and through us, we know that God is sovereign in bringing providence, and it's not just coincidence. So the plot thickens in chapter 3 through 6, and as it builds up in chapter 7 through 9, where things build to a climax and a resolution, just like a beautiful, powerful story. And what happens is Esther gains the favor with the king and asks him to a dinner with Haman and the king. And in this moment, in this very, very moment, there's providence because the king can't sleep. And he has people read him a story, and he remembers about Mordecai, and he says, hey, has anything been done for Mordecai? And of course, nothing's been done to honor him. And so he honors Mordecai in this moment, and Haman is just furious. And Esther gains favor with the king, and that's also supernatural. And everything is set up for Esther to get a favorable response from the king. And they go to this dinner, Mordecai, the king, and Haman. And she says to the king, hey, this guy's trying to kill me and the Jewish people. And the wrath of the king is against Haman and not against Esther. And the king has Haman hung. And then Esther says, hey, but they're going to kill us. And so we need you to help us. And so they make a second decree that the Jewish people can protect themselves. And they do, of course, in chapter 9. And then the book concludes in chapter 9 and 10 with the deliverance, but also an explanation of the Feast of Purim. And to this day, the Jewish people celebrate the Feast of Purim as a celebration of God's providence. And they celebrate with eating food. They celebrate with giving gifts to each other as well as to the poor. And they actually read the story and even act it out. And it's so fun because every time the name Haman comes up in the story, they boo and they hiss and such to blot out his name. It's a very beautiful celebration for a beautiful story. And again, this is such an encouragement to you and I. Read it. Be inspired by Mordecai and Esther's courage and by God's providential hand upon us to protect us. And one last thing, this book is so unique because it does not contain the name of Yahweh in the entire book. And it's so interesting. I believe that's only because it was written by probably Mordecai, but written to secular people. And yet, what's interesting is there's an acrostic of the name of Yahweh in the book. And so even though God's name is not mentioned, yet God's providential protection is mentioned all throughout the book. And kind of his name is woven in through this acrostic. And so in the same way, even when you don't see God working, he is working good for you and through you for others.